There are places for our dead, places of peace and not dread, sites of simple or elaborate stones that memorialize our lost ones' bones. Welcome to Stones and Bones. Welcome to Stones and Bones.
Hello, you spooktacular people. Welcome to Stones and Bones. I'm your host, Diane.
And this is Kelly. A few years after Mount Auburn Cemetery was established, the city of Bangor in the state of Maine would follow its lead. Mount Hope Cemetery would become the second rural cemetery established in America. Bangor was named for the oldest city in Wales and is the Queen City of Maine. At the time that the cemetery was established, the city was known as the lumber capital of the world. And while the city was quite successful, its burial grounds were in bad shape. Many were abandoned and unkempt, and the ones that were still being used were overcrowded. Bangor's mayor, in 1834, even declared that the cemeteries caused a soul-chilling experience. This would change as the city decided to try its hand at this new garden cemetery experiment.
The Bangor Horticultural Society was established in 1834. The society committed themselves to founding a new rural cemetery, and they found the perfect spot near the Penobscot River. They purchased 100 acres from a man named Joseph Treat. After the land was acquired, the society renamed itself the Mount Hope Cemetery Corporation. The president of the corporation was Amos Patton, and he wrote in an editorial in the newspaper, "Let us then do what we can to make Mount Hope worthy of Bangor and her enterprising citizens. It is to be the public burial place of our city, as well as that of private individuals. Let us then make it a garden. Let us have the winding stream, the shady mount, and the beautiful glen. And if nature has not been beneficent enough, let art triumph in her skill." These words clearly illustrated what a rural cemetery was meant to be, a reflection of the people who lived in a city.
A local architect named Charles G. Bryant was hired to design the cemetery. His vision was to divide Mount Hope into two areas, one for the gardens and the other for burials. Initially, the area for burials didn't look promising, as it was swampy around a pond. The city tried to drain the pond, but that failed, so they kept the pond, and this is now found near the main entrance and is called Office Pond.
I think it's because it's near the office building.
You think?
Yeah.
Over a period of 2 years, the cemetery was laid out and trees and bushes were planted. Mount Hope was dedicated on July 21st, 1836, by Mayor Edward Kent, and he said, "A spot situated like this, with the beauties of nature scattered on every hand, is calculated to give a chastened and holy calm to the mind, and to lead the thought to study nature in her works, and to God as her great author."
So what a turnaround for the mayor, because he's the one before that was like, our cemeteries here are soul chilling.
Right.
And now it's like, this is a holy calm to the mind and a study of nature. And you can just see he's
Changed his tune?
Yes, totally caught on with the garden thing. Bangor probate judge John Edward Godfrey visited the cemetery in 1873, and he wrote in his journal, "Mount Hope is greatly improving and will one day be one of the most beautiful cemeteries in the country. And it really is a gorgeous place to spend time taking in nature and the beautiful memorials." Through the years, more land was acquired until the cemetery grew to 264 acres. In 1972, the cemetery added a crematorium. After the dedication, tourists flocked to the cemetery, and many families began to move their previously buried loved ones to Mount Hope. So you've got all these old cemeteries that are not taken care of, they're overgrown, they look nasty. So people are like, I'm pulling Aunt Mabel out of there and taking her over to nice little Mount Hope over there.
Well, I can't say as I blame them.
And just like Mount Auburn, the plots were priced at an affordable level. I think it was like $20 for a plot.
Not too BAD.
Yeah. The rural garden cemeteries were an opportunity for the growing middle class to enhance their, quote, culture and class. Mount Hope was also open to all for burial. This, unfortunately, would not be the case for all future garden cemeteries, as we will discuss on future episodes. And when it comes to talking about this culture and this class that the middle class is going for, there was a lot of debate about what constituted good taste when it came to a cemetery. You know, we have a lot of rules nowadays. Well, they started to get a lot of rules back then, too.
Oh, boy.
It's one of those things, just because you can, should you?
Usually not.
All right, so this is out of the book Pleasure Grounds of Death, The Rural Cemetery in 19th Century America by Joy M. Giguère. When it came to matters of taste and public behavior within the cemetery landscape, however, the reality proved to be far more complex and often irksome for those in charge of managing the new cities of the dead. What constituted taste in a sepulchral monument was a constant source of debate, especially since Americans, with the exception of the wealthy, could for the first time begin purchasing something more substantial than a simple headstone beginning in the 1830s. There were no explicitly defined rules for sepulchral art and architecture. So for those who purchased a monument or contracted to have a family tomb built, individuals opted for styles according to personal preference and what their pocketbooks could allow. The increasing variety of disparate monument styles quickly led to public debates within the nation's major periodicals and among architects on what constituted quote-unquote good taste and what was ultimately most appropriate for a memorial setting. Further complicating the cultural dynamics of the rural cemetery, matters related to public behavior within the rural cemeteries quickly proved to be a source of ongoing consternation. For much of the 19th century, for cemetery trustees and purveyors of middle-class taste, fashion, and respectability. So you can see that there is this, debate about what looks good, what is too audacious, and that kind of thing.
Sure.
For me, there's really nothing too audacious.
Oh, you want a pinky-raised fancy schmancy
I do.
burial? All right. In 1909, the cemetery lodge was built. Maine architect Wilfred E. Manser, interred later at Mount Hope, designed the cemetery lodge or office. It would remain in use, with relatively few modifications to the present time. Of Old English design, the lodge originally held space for an office and a chapel, with large fireplaces gracing the main rooms. Maine whole granite from Mount Desert Island and half-timbered stucco finished the building. The lodge retains some of its original furnishings.
It's very cute. It looks like something that you would see in a European kind of downtown area, a pub with the wood slats on the outside.
It
Kind
is
of
cute.
decorative. There are places that have been designated as charitable burial areas, like the Home for Aged Women and the Home for Aged Men. The Home for Aged Women lot was donated in the 1870s and 1890s, and it ultimately had 53 interments there. During that same era, Mount Hope donated burial space nearby to the Bangor Female Orphan Asylum, later the Bangor Children's Home, where at least 17 children would be buried. And then, of course, there was also the Home for Aged Men. And they had the Maine Charity School, which later became the Bangor Theological Seminary.
The first person laid to rest was a man named Samuel Call, who had died on July 9, 1836. He was buried at the top of Cemetery Hill overlooking the Penobscot River, and he lies under a 10-foot obelisk. Many notable people would be buried here through the years, representing politics, education, the military, entertainment, and much more. There are around 30,000 burials. One notable burial is for U.S. Senator Arthur Gould. He became a wealthy man through a variety of commerce involving railroads, lumber, and hydroelectricity. He served as a senator from 1926 to 1931 and ran on a ticket that favored maintaining the 18th Amendment, which established prohibition. Once in office, however, he became nationally known for writing in favor of the legalization of wine and beer.
Isn't that typical of somebody who gets voted in and then it's like, I'm going to totally change my mind and run on, I ran on this, now I support this kind of thing.
Yep.
I have a feeling that the breweries and wineries out there came in and said, hey, Congress.
Who's going to line my pockets best?
Yeah, let's not go with this prohibition thing. Another notable figure from politics is Hannibal Hamlin, who served as Abraham Lincoln's first vice president.
Oh.
Did you know that he had a different vice president that first term?
I did not realize that.
I didn't either until we did this episode. Hamlin was a lawyer who served in the Maine legislature and then became the governor of the state. Later, he served in Congress as both a representative and senator. He served as vice president for Lincoln's first term, but when it came to Lincoln's second term, the Republicans decided to choose a new vice president, and this would be Andrew Johnson. That means that Maine they were this close, Kelly, to having a president from their state for the first and only time. Maine almost got it there. Of course, for a horrible reason, but...
True.
Now, this change, you're like, well, why would they do that? Was he a bad dude or something? No, it was just made to appease the Southerners and keep the peace because the war had ended. And so they're like, let's pick a guy from down south so that the Southerners realize that we do want to work with them and everything. Hamlin is buried in the Riverview lawn section of the cemetery on the State Street side. His children are also buried in his plot. And now a little break for a word about one of our sponsors.
There are 4 other Maine governors buried here. William D. Williamson,
His parents were very creative in coming up with his first name there.
Harris M. Plaisted, Frederick W. Plaisted,
I'm assuming they were related. That's a pretty unusual last name.
and Israel Washburn Jr. There are also 2 U.S. ambassadors and Franklin Muzzy, who was the 32nd president of the Maine Senate. There are also 8 Civil War generals. Rufus Dwinell was just one of many lumber barons buried here. He died in 1869 and was buried under a large solid granite sarcophagus raised above ground on 4 granite pillars. Another lumber baron was General Samuel Vesey. He was born in 1787 and became a general during the War of 1812. After that, he purchased railroads and mills and got very involved in lumber. Vesey founded the Maine town named for him. He died in 1868 of a stroke. The Samuel Vesey tomb occupies a unique place in Mount Hope's history. Before other arrangements were made, General Vesey allowed the cemetery to hold bodies in his crypt over the winter for spring burial. His crypt was partially dug into the side of Cemetery Hill. His wife predeceased him in 1852.
That was nice of him because I'd be like, I don't want other dead bodies in my tomb before I get in there. They're already breaking it in for me. Eee. Get some crypt juice in there. You don't want to know that.
Oh, Diane. Good grief.
Gangster Al Brady is the most infamous character in Mount Hope. Brady became the FBI's public enemy number 1 after John Dillinger was killed. Again, here's something else I learned because I had no idea. I've never heard of Al Brady. Have you?
I have not.
His gang was vicious and violent, and they tore a crime and killing spree right through the Midwest all the way up to the backwoods of Maine in 1937. Brady and his men thought they would be safe from capture in Maine, but as Brady and gang members Clarence Schaefer and James Dahlhover were walking Central Street in downtown Bangor on October 12, 1937, a firefight broke out and Brady and Schaefer were killed. Federal agents were already waiting for them in Bangor when they arrived. The gangster's family had no money, so the city of Bangor buried him in an unmarked grave at Mount Hope across Mount Hope Avenue.
Another infamous person buried here was Fanny Jones. Fanny, or Nancy Jones, purchased a cemetery lot at Mount Hope well before her death in 1909. Bangor's most well-known madam, she was also an astute businesswoman who owned property at the time of her death. Although she does not have a grave marker placed for herself, there are markers for others there, including those of children. 2 of the children's markers featured doves, symbols of peace and purity. The stone for Harry Irvin retains its dove, the other does not.
So I think it's kind of sweet that this well-known madam there, even though they didn't give her a headstone, she's got innocent, buried with her. So there's innocent children with the dove
Around
and everything.
her,
So
yeah.
it's kind of nice. But man, with her having some kind of a history there, I'd like to know a little bit more. And I'd kind of like to see the city make an effort to give her a headstone. But Doris Pike White was an American businesswoman, teacher, investment banker, and civic leader who served as the 24th President General of the Daughters of the American Revolution. She died in 1987 at the age of 90. Actor Richard Golden was born in 1854 and was an American stage actor and comedian whose most famous role was Old Jed Prouty in his play of the same name. The play created the genre of Down East humor. Golden became one of the most celebrated comedians of his generation. He was born in Bangor, married, divorced, worked in theaters, and eventually went broke in 1893. The following year, he was in the alcoholics ward at Bellevue Hospital. Golden eventually got himself back together and became that celebrated comic, and then he died suddenly in 1909 in New York and was brought back to Bangor for burial.
Ralph Sipperly was also a comic. He was born in Rochester, New York, and found his fame on the Broadway theater scene before he broke into silent films. One of his plays was called Six-Cylinder Love, and he played a high-powered car salesman, and during one performance, he accidentally drove an actual automobile off the stage and into the first row of seats.
Whoops! That was talk about 3D.
Yeah, whoopsie-woo! Nobody was hurt, thankfully. Of the 10 films he appeared in, his most notable portrayal was as the barber in Sunrise, A Song of Two Humans from 1927, which also won the Academy Award for Best Picture. He died in 1928 at the age of 38.
I have no idea what he died from, so I don't know why he died so young. Mount Hope has 3 Civil War memorials, one of which is thought to be the oldest in the nation. The first was established after Maine resident Stephen Decatur Carpenter died in a battle in Kentucky on December 31st, 1862. So he died on New Year's Eve. Wow. After his body was returned to Bangor, residents decided to create a monument to honor all their Civil War dead. This would end up being a 20-foot-high obelisk called the Soldiers' Monument that is located near the main entrance. Carpenter was buried there until 1881 when he was moved to a family plot. The second monument was built when the Soldiers' Monument had filled up. This one was called the Grand Army of the Republic Fort and was dedicated on October 7th, 1907. And this one looks really cool, Kelly, because it's kind of like a castle tower. So it's got the battlements at the top of it.
It is very cool. It looks like Castillo de San Marcos.
Yeah, it's kind of like if you were to describe it and you're looking at a chessboard, it's a rook.
Yes,
That's basically what
absolutely.
It is. It's one of the most frequented locations at Mount Hope. Started years earlier, but dedicated in 1907, the donated site was intended as a burial space for those who had served in the Civil War, whether they had actually died during the war or died after. So it was even for the veterans. The lot features small markers for the dead. Some 30 veterans would ultimately be buried here, as well as flags, cannons, and a masonry tower, which we just described for you. The final monument was dedicated in the 1960s for the 2nd Maine Regiment. This is a sculpture designed by Vernon Schaefer that features a bronze sculpture of a faceless angel carrying a wounded soldier set atop a marble slab that bears the inscription, "Not painlessly doth God recast and mold anew the nation." The line is from John Greenleaf Whittier's poem, Emfesberg first unser Gott, or Luther's Hymn. And I'm sure I butchered that because I don't speak German.
The Forgotten War, the Korean War, has a monument that was dedicated on July 29, 1995. This can be found on the Mount Hope Avenue side of the cemetery and bears the names of all 233 Mainers killed or missing in the war. Their names are inscribed on the 15-foot-high black granite wall. The flags of each of the 29 nations that participated in the conflict on the side of South Korea under the United Nations flank the white granite approach. A tablet depicting a map of the war zone is also present.
Another distinctive memorial is the Weber Mausoleum, which is on the Riverview lawn side of Cemetery Hill. This was created for Franklin R. Weber and his wife, Martha, who gave a lot to the cemetery. They gave the Mount Hope trustees money for an iron wrought fence on the cemetery's State Street side in the early 1920s, and in the 1930s, they gave the cemetery money to build the Weber Waiting Room. Now, at first I was like, is this like to put bodies in that are waiting to get buried?
Definitely unusual.
This is constructed largely of pink Maine granite and bronze. It's a circular waiting room, and it was designed by George I. Mansur. He was the brother of the lodge architect, Wilfred Mansur, so they both went into being architects, clearly. Measuring 15 feet in diameter outside and 10 feet inside, the building allowed people to wait inside and out of inclement weather for the trolley that ran along State Street. So it wasn't a waiting room for dead bodies.
Dead bodies.
The waiting room remains popular with cemetery visitors and is now the cemetery's logo or emblem. It's very cool looking, I think.
It's very pretty. The Hill family mausoleum was built in 1918 for Frederick Hill, wife Marianne, and mother-in-law Nancy O. Eggery. A philanthropist, Frederick gave the Bangor Public Library, Eastern Maine General Hospital, now Eastern Maine Medical Center, the University of Maine, the YMCA, and Bangor's Home for Aged Women a total of more than $2 million upon his death. Frederick Hill had the circular white granite mausoleum built to hold the remains of his wife Marianne Hill and her mother as well as himself upon his death. He left arrangements for the mausoleum's perpetual care, including initially regular deliveries of fresh flowers and for the door to be left open from spring to autumn.
Why? Because they want to get out and walk around?
Chill out the smell.
I guess. Because I would think during the winter you wouldn't want it open because it's so cold.
I don't think you're going to care when you're dead, darling. The grill outside of the glass doors was to remain closed at all times.
So he didn't want people coming in. He just wanted them to be able to see the light, I guess. I don't know.
Fresh air and all.
Yeah.
In addition, Hill left a $50,000 trust fund to the Eastern Trust and Banking Company of Bangor, so a dozen roses could be placed in a vase in the tomb twice a week from May 1st to November 1st. He directed that roses also be placed in the tomb on Christmas, Memorial Day, and Easter. In addition, he directed the cemetery to inspect the mausoleum periodically and make necessary repairs.
I wonder if he haunts it if they don't keep up with it. There's also the Amanda Schofield Memorial. This was created in 1927, and it remains one of the cemetery's most photographed monuments. A classical open temple or circular colonnade constructed of white granite. It's topped with a rim or band of stone inscribed and dedicated inside to a, quote, beloved mother. Schofield's resting place is marked by a similar monument within the colonnade, and other markers are situated outside it for family members. And I think when I looked up her find a grave, she had 6 or 7 children. So
Wow.
she's definitely a mom. It's a very cool monument.
It is.
I've never seen something that's open, like round like that. Again, something that looks like the Lincoln Memorial that you could have like a sculpture in the middle of it or something.
Yeah, it's very nice. Fun fact, part of the movie Pet Sematary was filmed at Mount Hope. Stephen King appears as a minister who is presiding over a funeral, and that is on the State Street side of the cemetery. The sloping hills and other areas were seen in various scenes throughout the film. Some stairs that are in the cemetery to the right of the Bragg family plot are also in the movie.
I thought that was pretty cool that they
Yeah.
filmed there.
Definitely.
Mount Hope Cemetery continued the rural garden movement in grand fashion. Many more garden cemeteries would follow. They were a fine way to memorialize our dead here in America. Thanks for joining us as we shared about the stones and bones found here. I've been your host, Diane.
And this has been Kelly.
You take care now.
Bye-bye.
Stones and bones. Bones, bones.
A few years after Mount Auburn Cemetery was established, the city of Bangor...
Bangor.
Bangor?
The city of Bangor. Kelly!
Bangers and mash?
Oh, I thought you were talking about Bang Her. I was like, where did this show go? Rated
Get your
R.
mind out of the gutter.
And if nature has not been beneficent.
Beneficent?
Another distinctive memorial is the Weber Mausoleum.
Mausoleum.
It's very distinctive.
Weebles wobble, but they don't fall down?
They don't fall down.
A philanthropist. Philanthropist